our society is moving towards Marxism.
Because of what we did on this day, at this defining moment, change has come to America.
Our revolution now becomes your revolution.
Something's wrong, and we all know it. I'm Charlie Daniels, and I'm here to tell you about it.
The nation has been hijacked by international forces. The dark side, bent on global governance. Alex Jones.
What is the goal? It is to create a one-world government. It's as old as time itself.
Authoritarian officials with jackboots could say, "Your papers, please," and stop you and demand to see your ID.
The Department of Homeland Security issued a declaration to all law enforcement, state, local, and federal, saying that the future threats to America were right-wing Christian groups, Second Amendment groups, pro-life groups,
Wake up, America,
and returning veterans.
while you still have time.
Just think of this country again as one nation under God. America with borders, a nation of patriots who are proud of our heritage, our achievement.
Now it remains necessary for all Americans to draw such a line in the sand.
It's time to ride, boys. We need 1,000 Paul Revere's.
RevelationTheMovie.info.
No is a powerful concept.
Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. This is David Schnitker with today's Southwest Prophecy Ministries program. Thanks for joining us. You have just heard the trailer of a film that is sweeping the country. And it is a real privilege to have George Washington with us today to discuss the new DVD release entitled Revelation, Dawn of Global Government. Well, in truth, we do not have George Washington here, but we have Mark Collins with us today, and he is the actor who portrayed George Washington in this film. Well, this DVD is a 1 hour and 45 minutes long. It took 5 years to produce. There's so much content in this DVD that we have taken several programs to discuss it. But the most luminous participant in this DVD, which features 38 patriots, God-loving and American-loving people, certainly the most illustrious participant in this film was George Washington, and wonderfully portrayed by Mark Collins. So at the end of the show, I will share with you how you can get a copy of this amazing film. But today we want to interview Mark Collins and introduce him to our audience and let him be the voice of George Washington to Americans today. Well, Mark, welcome to our show.
Yes, David, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you today.
Well, it's certainly my honor. And I was so impressed by your portrayal of George Washington, the father of our country, that we certainly are privileged to be able to interview you. Now tell us, Mark Collins, what is it that you do in real life?
Well, David, I am full-time senior pastor at the First Baptist Church of Yorktown, Texas. I've been in ministry for approximately 32 years, married to my high school sweetheart, my wife, Debbie. We have 6 children, and it has just been a joy to attempt feebly to fill those boots of our founding father, George Washington, and I've had opportunity to do that. Many speaking engagements. I've done 5 different film projects. One of my favorites, of course, is the Revelation movie, and I'm excited about the opportunity that it may have to turn the hearts of our nation back to those founding principles that made us a great nation.
Now, I'm curious, probably our listeners are as well, how you as a busy pastor in the great state of Texas came to portray George Washington. I will say from a looks perspective, I mean, you are the spitting image of at least the plaster casts I've seen of George Washington's face. But how did it come about that you, how should we say, veered into this opportunity?
Yes, it's amazing how the Lord opens different doors and windows for us and different aspects of ministry that he allows us to be a part of. if you would have told me 19 years ago that you're going to have a ministry in which you're wearing women's stockings and a blue bow and your long white hair, I would have told you were crazy. I kept my hair on a flat top. Really don't like long hair, but I began to turn gray when I was officially I was gray according to my driver's license at 27, and I'm a 6'4". And it's just amazing how I've had opportunity because of those physical attributes that been able to portray our founding father in films, different speaking opportunities. But the most exciting is to share with our young people. I probably get into 50 to 60 schools a year and share those founding principles that Washington adamantly proclaimed to our nation so many years ago in so many ways. As you read the quotes of our founding, it's amazing what our children are not being taught about those things. But it started, as I say, 19 years ago. I was associate pastor at a church, and I would always portray John the Baptist or Noah for children's programs. And the pastor looked, and the 4th of July was going to be on a Sunday. And so he asked if I would consider portraying George Washington, and so began to research, and David really became angry at what I had not been taught. For example, that Washington committed 2 hours a day to prayer throughout his adult life, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and praying until 5, and then he would start his day, and in the evenings he would as he said in one of his journal entries, retired to my chambers and prayed and meditated on God's word from 9 until 10. He did that every day of his life, and I had never heard that, and our children don't know those stories. And so that's been an aspect of my ministry, but that's how it started on a Sunday morning, 4th of July, some 19 years ago. And the Lord has just opened up so many doors and opportunities, literally around the world, to remind a forgetful nation, forgetful world, of the principles that make us a blessed nation.
Well, amen. And it's a great joy to know that you have open doors in some public schools to teach these forgotten truths about America's great godly founding father. Now let's talk about this film. I've been interviewing Chuck and Anita Untersee, of course, the directors and editors, executive producers, and just about everything else in this film, which has been a labor of love for them for 5 years in bringing this into production. How did you get involved in this film?
Well, one of my early film productions was a 13-part miniseries for the History Channel called The Revolution. And in it, I portrayed Washington. We shot that mostly in New York, upper state New York, some wonderful locations. And what an opportunity to recreate some of the great events of the beginning of our nation, of Washington's life. And so we did that. And Chuck and Anita had the vision to recreate the crossing of the Delaware just as a throwback to history in the film, connecting what's going on in our nation now to its beginnings, which is very important that we know our heritage. And so as they were trying to basically fill that boat with the different characters that many paintings have depicted that scene, they were sitting down one evening and watched the Revolution series, and they said, "Hey, I'd love to have that George Washington in my boat. See if you can find him." So they call around, find out Partisan Pictures in Manhattan, New York, was the production company that made that miniseries. They called and said, this George Washington, is he possibly available, and where could we get a hold of him? And they were flabbergasted to find out that I lived on the east side of San Antonio, and Chuck and Anita live on the west side of San Antonio.
That's amazing.
So that was the beginning of it, and just really saw their vision, and it was contagious. They really have a heart to turn this nation back, and so I was very honored to be asked to be part of the project. Absolutely.
Well, here's the most important question, Mark, that, of course, George Washington's appearance in this film, throughout the film, actually, is not just a cameo, And he has a very special and important message to Americans through this film. Though he, in the context of the theatrical release, doesn't have a lot of time, we have more time. What do you think, Pastor, if George Washington were alive today as the father of our country, what do you think he would say to Americans?
David, I don't have to guess or try to create that. It is an amazing document that he gave us in his farewell address. And he basically laid out many cautions. He laid out a blueprint to continued blessing and the advancement of this nation in so many ways in prosperity. And he laid it out, and it as you read it today, it's amazing. He literally was reading our mail. What he cautioned against is exactly what's happening today. And we have forgotten those principles. We've stepped away from them almost intentionally. And we are beginning to really pay a price for that. So going back to that document, and let me inject this as I begin to share with you just a few brief quotes from that document. In talking to my grandmother, bless her soul, she left this world at 98, some 6 years ago. She said when she was in school, David, Washington's farewell address was required memorization before you could graduate high school. That's how important that document was. Her generation had to memorize the entire document and to be able to quote it from memory before they could advance out of high school. By the time my father, so I was curious about that, so I asked my father about his recollections of the farewell address, and he said, well, it was required reading back then, and today it's barely even mentioned. As an example, one textbook that I was made aware of some years ago, it's been about a decade ago, it had half of a page dedicated to the life of George Washington. A few pages later, it had dedicated 6 pages to a lady named Marilyn Monroe. And now this was a book on American history.
Wow.
So that tells you where our nation is going.
Things have changed, haven't they, Pastor?
Yes. But let me just give you a few thoughts.
Okay.
One of the things he said is there are 2 irremovable pillars to the government that we have. And those pillars, in other words, these are 2 pillars that hold up the government. And he said that they were morality and religion. In vain would that man claim the attribute of a patriot who would work to subvert, or if you will, remove those 2 pillars. Isn't that amazing? And I fear there's many non-patriots walking the streets of our state capitals, and especially of Washington, D.C., who are working to remove those 2 pillars that George Washington said our government cannot stand if they're removed.
Oh, absolutely.
John Adams, your second president, he said the government we have formed is for religious and moral people and will not work for any other. And as our country begins to not work, if you will, we need to go back and see those cautions that those brilliant men, almost prophets, if you will, if I can use the term, they were looking forward and seeing the possibility that we could forget these principles. And they were trying to warn us, and we have not heeded those warnings.
Amen. What else would George say to us today?
He would say, and as he said back then, that a primary objective of the institution of public education should be to educate our youth in the science of government. Now, David, we don't even consider science to be government to be a science today. And yet he said one of the greatest undertakings in education that we can undertake is to teach our youth the science of government, cause and effect. Just like you do in a scientific experiment, we need to look at how things work and what doesn't work historically. And if you go back and look at the progressive movement today, it has been tried over and over and over again, and it always leads to destruction. And yet, we don't go back to those principles. Our children don't know the science of government. As I get into those schools, and I'm talking from elementary age to universities, I have opportunities to go and to speak. And I'll ask the students, what form of government do we had? And almost without fail, they say democracy, because that's what they've been shared with. Well, our founding fathers said that democracy, if I may quote, is mob rule, and democracies live short lives and die violent deaths. That's what our founders said about democracy. Now, democracy plays into the establishment of the keepers of the law in a republic, which is fundamentally the rule of law. And those that hold public office, from the president to the governor to your local dog catcher, his purpose as an elected official is to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's what it says, and that's what I share with the children. And it's amazing, David. More than one occasion, I've actually had the teacher come up afterward and humbly confess, I learned more about government in the United States today than I've learned in 14, 15, 16 years of education in America.
What a shocking admission.
It
really is a sad statement, isn't it? Yes.
Yes. Teaching the science of government, even that science can be measured and calculated and observed and look historically, so we don't have to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Another aspect of that is completely missed, and it's truly the purpose of Washington's and John Adams and many of other founding fathers' statement that morality and religion are so important. In fact, how important are they? After the first 13 colonies, the Northwest Ordinance was that document that as these other territories were coming forward and desiring to be states, well, the federal government said, here are the requirements to become a state. And under Article 3, one of the first statements says that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary for good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. I don't think it's any accident what order those were in. Why would they say that? Why would they say that religion, morality, and knowledge must be taught? If you want to be a state, you have to promise to teach those things to the children of the citizens of your state. That's amazing. It flies in the face of what is being portrayed today.
Oh, absolutely. None of this progressive pluralism.
Exactly. And here's the fundamental foundation to that the center of our government, and I ask kids this, I'll put a picture of the state capitol and of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and I'll say, where is the core, the center of the government we have? And, of course, some of them say the state, some of them say the federal government. And then I draw a stick man, and I said, no, actually, it's in this individual, and our founders called it self-governance. You see, David, the more that we are self-governed, the more that we have moral character within us, the less there has to be outside influences that guide us. There again, John Adams said, we will either be guided by the Bible or the bayonet. Isn't that interesting? We will be guided by the Bible internally, or we're going to have to put forth more police force, more jails, more external law, because man is not capable of governing himself. So the core, the founding principle of our government is self-governance, and our children are not being taught that. We don't know that.
And that, of course, goes back to biblical Christianity.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And so it's those fundamental things have been lost, and until we turn back to them, we're in a lot of trouble. And it is our prayer. I'm so excited to be part of the Revelation film, because the opportunity, hopefully, to spark some investigation in people so they'll go back and look at these things and begin to teach them to their children and grandchildren.
Right. We certainly have to recover the history of our godly founders, such as George Washington and John Adams, men who knew God, they knew the Scriptures, they knew history, and they knew what would happen when we neglected these important foundations for our country. Now, you told me offline that as you go from place to place, that you're occasionally urged to put your hat in the ring for a public office. Is that the case?
Yes, I wish I had $1 every time somebody would beg me as I'm dressed like George Washington, would you please come back and run for president again? We really need you.
Oh, absolutely. Boy, maybe we can write you in this time. Well, that's an encouraging thing. It's an encouraging thing that people are recognizing the wisdom of our founding father, not just for his military exploits, but for his godly character. And his wisdom.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a very sad statement. I was involved, done a few events at Mount Vernon, and they created a 15-minute film, spent a substantial amount of money. And what you do is when you buy your ticket into Mount Vernon to see it, they realize so many people have no clue who George Washington really was, besides the first president, and their knowledge stops there. So they said we shuffle them into this auditorium and show a 15-minute film that describes the life of Washington from his birth to his death in 15 minutes. Because as they walk through the museum, really they can't connect to any of this stuff because they don't know our history.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that's interesting. One man said, people without a heritage are easily manipulated. And that was Karl Marx that said that statement. And as we look at that statement in California and other states, but specifically in California recently, they're considering taking American history completely out of the curriculum so they have more time to invest in studying for the, quote, SAT or the evaluation tests that are required. So they're actually talking about taking American history completely out of curriculum. And there again, going back to Karl Marx's statement, that's playing right into that hand.
Oh, absolutely is.
People with heritage are easily manipulated.
Right, and certainly not by accident, in my opinion.
Yes. I consider it very intentional. Hate to think that, but I'm sure it is.
Yes. Well, Pastor Mark, we're out of time for today. This has been a very fascinating discussion. It's not every day I have the opportunity to interview George Washington. And I do thank you for being part of this film, and thank you for taking this time to share with our people what George would say, George Washington would say to Americans today. I do appreciate that.
Thank you so much, and please encourage people to get out, go see the film, bring a friend, people that don't have those concepts. They need to see this film.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. God bless.
God bless. Well, friends, I'm sure that you will want to obtain a copy of this DVD entitled Revelation, Dawn of Global Government. In this amazing film, you will learn about the issues that are taking America down the dark path toward globalism from some of the leading patriots in the country, including George Washington. This film also equips you in the fight for liberty today. Now, you may obtain a copy of this DVD, nearly 2 hours in length, for a gift of $19.95, plus $5 for shipping and handling. You may obtain this film in one of two ways. You may order it through our website, that is www.swpm.us. That's www.swpm.us. Or you may order it through the mail at Southwest Prophecy Ministries, Post Office Box 58043, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma 73157. That address again is Box 58043, Oklahoma City 73157. Please join us next week for the next program from Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Until then, this is David Schnitker. Thanks for listening.